This podcast is brought to you by sarahraven.com, which is home to everything you need for a truly beautiful and productive garden. You'll also find great and essential gardening kit and stylish, lovely things to have in your house to bring the outside indoors, all inspired by the garden and the house being tied together. There's also plenty of garden inspiration, how-to videos and specialist growing guides. So head over to sarahraven.com today to discover even more.
Welcome to Grow, Cook, Eat, Arrange, the podcast of Sarah Raven, and in this episode of me, Arthur Parkinson. And what we thought we'd do, seeing as we're recording this now in autumn, is do a sort of summary of garden biodiversity. With us both being on social media, we've noticed how alarming for a lot of gardeners, and everybody really, whether you're gardeners or not, the lack of insects has been this summer due to the rain and the cold, but also possibly other things. So what me and Sarah thought we'd do is just have a chat and a recap really of how we feel our gardens are helping nature and things we can improve on, and the plants that this year we've really noticed bees and butterflies and moths really be drawn to in the garden.
Yeah, it has definitely been really noticeable because we had such a wet spring and then went on to have a wet early summer and even July, to be honest. The insect populations were much lower. Not birds with us, but definitely insect populations. And in a way, I think we had it less here because we're so flower rich than I noticed, as you say, on guests coming to the garden and customers coming to the garden on the garden openings, just sort of saying, oh gosh, you've got lots of bees here. We haven't got any bees. And I think it drew Josie and the gardening teams and my attention to the fact that it's so important to have late flowering things, because if insects are emerging late, they're going to need late flowers for pollen and nectar. And so classic dahlias like the Honker series, those lovely starry ones, and the Bishop's Children, etc., are just super, super important, I think. Did you find that too, Arthur?
Yeah, I mean, with my garden, the rain, I'm trying to think back to when it really started to get wet and cold. I remember, I think it must have been May, feeling really triumphant because I've planted a lot of the GM Totally Tangerine. And I noticed last year that the wild bumblebees in particular really love that shape of the flower, that simple buttercup meadow flower. And so the bumblebees were all over that, but then it did get cold, didn't it? Right the way after Chelsea, the weather just seemed to go very violently out of kilter. And I think the problem with the media and the message of what climate change is we haven't been given this message, unless you're, a reader of what David Attenborough's been telling us for the past 10 years, that climate change is paired up with mass extinction and loss of biodiversity. And I think for a lot of us, this sudden localized extinction really of insects from the gardens has been a real frightening time. I mean, I've had people who don't really garden and who don't notice. They've all said to me, gosh, where are the butterflies? And we've only seen a cabbage white this year. So I think the only good thing from this year, I hope, is that more and more people will think, right, what can we do to pump up the nectar and pollen in the garden? So as soon as the weather does become able where these bees and butterflies can fly, they've got a feast. So yeah, I mean, the wonderful thing about you is you've paired up dahlia breeding with beauty, but also pollen and nectar rich, whereas not so long ago it was purely based on the beauty. So it was wonderful at Chelsea. Keep going back to Chelsea, but I think the fact that it was in the middle of London, even though we had 3 pots of dahlias, one was Sarah Raven and the other was Totally Tangerine, and I think the other might have been Lou Farman. But even there, those 3 dahlias were constantly alive with bumblebees in particular. So there is a lot of hope, but we've got to act quicker, I think, in how we see our gardens as being diverse with nectar and pollen all through the year.
Yeah, totally. And I asked the gardeners here to make a note of any changes in the plants that they really felt were, first of all, drawing in the butterflies and then the bees. And In a way, there are no surprises here, I would say, but they definitely, over a couple of weeks since I asked them, they then really tried to do a sort of butterfly count on the different plants through here. And I thought I'd give the list of the top 5, which, as I say, perhaps aren't any surprises, but I think it's quite interesting to see the order. And they definitely felt, surprise, surprise, Buddleia was number 1. And obviously, it's coming to an end now, but we have varieties flowering here from June until October. Because of the new cultivars, if you keep deadheading them, they keep flowering. And they are called the butterfly bush for a good reason. They have a very sweet smell to draw in the butterflies to their nectar and their pollen. But they definitely felt that they were most busy, particularly, interestingly, with peacocks and tortoiseshells. So that's exciting. And then the single dahlias, which we've banged on quite a lot about already. So they, across the board, but particularly Blue Bayou, had red admirals, lots of them whenever the sun comes out. And then number 3, they definitely felt was Cosmos, which actually we've already taken out of the garden now because the wet, it doesn't like wet Cosmos. And we've had some massive thunderstorms through the autumn and some quite serious rainy weekends and things. And so they've come out already, but they were fantastic. Cabbage whites, yes, but actually also lots of other butterflies. Echinaceas, so we've got an echinacea trial going on here, and that has been really busy with butterflies of good range of varieties, of species. And then finally, verbena, which I know for birds is really important, but verbena rigida, verbena hastata, verbena bonariensis, and verbena bampton have all been really busy with butterflies, they felt, this year. So I thought that was quite interesting to do a sort of audit of what the people who are out in the garden have noticed this year on butterflies. And they've done the same for bees. But what have you noticed anything particularly good for butterflies this year?
Well, I will be completely honest. There's been a number of occasions where both here in Nottingham I've gone out and there have been nothing, despite having all of most of the things you've mentioned. As the summer weather did ease better in September, late August, September, there's a hydrangea that you introduced me to, the hot chocolate one. And the honeybees in particular seem to really like that hydrangea because it's not like the other mop heads and Annabelle type hydrangeas where the flower is made up mostly of bracts. The hot chocolate one has got a lovely fuzzy blue centre full of anthers and pollen. So the bumblebees really seem to be drawn to that. The asters, late flowering asters, Violetta and September ruby, my mum's got them in her garden and they're very good for pots actually, and they've self-seeded and they're very late. So the butterflies there were a few occasions where we did see butterflies. I mean, it's interesting. I'm glad at Perch Hill you're saying you've got the birds, because I have to be honest, in Gloucester in particular, the garden has been completely silent until, late August when the robins suddenly reappeared. But we've had a lot of jackdaws in our village, and I think they've kind of drowned out the songbirds. I know there's various reasons why it's boom and bust for things, and you shouldn't pin a species on another species. But I really feel that localised, the amount of jackdaws and magpies does have an effect on the smaller birds. But the one nice thing is the amount of panicum frost explosion I've got in the garden.
Self-seeded.
The birds are on that in the morning. You do walk out and you do get the sparrows and the robins, and there's a little Jenny Wren. They do love that. And that for me is the way I want to feed birds. I don't want bird feeders in the garden, mainly due to squirrels. And also I don't want to attract the bigger birds into the garden, because if you put a fat ball out here, you've just got a jackdaw on it straight away.
Right,
and our mutual friend Caroline, she's in a situation where the neighbour has got a huge buffet-like bird table, and she's getting jackdaws and seagulls, and it's just like something out of a Hitchcock film. So I would say to people, think about growing a living buffet for your birds, and it will mean that you get the more delicate species, and it also means you've not got any issue with dirty bird feeders that all these studies are saying are causing a lot more harm than good for birds with what they're harbouring bacteria. But the bird bath's been fabulous. I mean, I just love our bird bath, and it's amazing what that draws in for birds. And also bees. It's been a wet year, so bees haven't needed watering holes because the poor things have been so damp half the time. But in a dry summer, bird bath or a shallow bowl will be really vital for bees, because they need water as well as pollen and nectar.
Yeah. So the only other one, well, as well as the Panicum violaceum, as well as another cracker, but we had a sweet thing here the other day, which is, Jonathan Buckley, the photographer I work with and love dearly, was here in torrential rain. And normally we might have torrential rain for an hour or two here, but he arrived on a Friday, pouring rain, stayed Saturday, pouring rain. And by Saturday evening, we just sort of gave up and thought we might as well just stop this shoot and regroup. But anyway, very sweetly, he went out into the garden in the pouring rain. A little interlude where it wasn't actually raining. And he got the most amazing photograph of the claret sunflower with a great tit and a blue tit, both feeding on the big head. And literally the great tit has got a sunflower kernel in its beak. It's so amazing in this picture. And he's got a little video of it, which we're going to put up on the website. And it's just extraordinary of these birds coming in and just these hanging heads in the pouring rain, or just stopped because he can't go out with his cameras when it's actually raining, but it was still dripping wet everywhere. And he just got this beautiful, beautiful picture. So, of course, we all know sunflower seeds are what we put on our and sunflower heads on our bird feeder tables. But just as Arthur says, if you can actually grow the sunflower, then you massively reduce the risk of cross-transfer of disease issues. So it's a really good thing to do. And then just as I said I just wanted to talk about bees and other pollinators. And so again, the gardeners here have really taken time to make a note of the things that they feel this year have been particularly incredible and busy with bees. So I always say at the beginning of the year, well, in spring, Allium bulgaricum or Nectarscordum bulgaricum, same plant, that just creates a bee ballet. But we've got a few other new things. So there's a new plant that's related to scabious that we've grown from seed as a trial here called Successella inflexa. And so that's SUCCISELLA. And wowzer, it looks like a little mini pom-pom scabious, and that is covered in bees, even when the sun isn't shining. It's extraordinary. And butterflies too, but bees really seem to love it. And there's another plant that is well known for bees and butterflies called Gilia, and it's Gilia leptantha, and it's blue, a sort of pom-pom, and that has been amazing as well, just totally amazing. So they're both in a new trial of pollinator-friendly plants. And they add to the ones that we know about, which are the single dahlias and the sunflowers, the helianthus, and, of course, salvias. And we've noticed, I think, because the weather's been poor, salvias have actually been more and more busy with bees because they're such a reliable late flowerer. And so the nectar-robbing bees are making holes in the back right at the back of the flower rather than coming in from the front. And we really notice, if we look closely at all our salvia flowers, almost all of them have got those piercings where the bees have gone in the back of the flower. So the Successella, the single dahlias, the Gilia, the helianthus and salvias were their 1 to 5 in terms of the things that they've noticed out there day on day have been most busy with bees and pollinators this year.
Wonderful. I mean, it's amazing, the salvia thing, isn't it? Because that is evolution in action. I mean, bees didn't know Salvia amistad much, did they, 10 years ago?
No. No.
And the other signal, the big thing that we forget is how important our bats are. And over the summer, when I visit my grandma Sheila in her little bungalow, we've had a kind of triumph this year where she lives, because she lives in an almshouse. There's about 5 other bungalows attached to hers in like a half a hexagon shape. And there's a communal lawn in the middle. And for 5 years at least, I've been emailing the people who own it saying, can we please reduce the mowing? Can we please stop mowing this lawn every week? And during lockdown, of course, they couldn't mow it. So this really old lawn, it was amazing what flowered. There was bird's foot trefoil and yarrows and everything. But anyway, since lockdown ended, the mowing weekly resumed. So we didn't see any wildflowers within it. Anyway, this year, they finally decided to properly not mow it. So they only mow around the edge and they mow paths through the middle to create these big triangle-like shapes. And the result of that has not only been more pollinators, but in the evening, we can sit in my grandma's living room with the curtains open and we just see bats. It's like a display of bats. And obviously they're eating all the nocturnal insects that are coming out of the grass. And that's kind of like the forgotten part of our local biodiversity, isn't it? The nighttime wildlife that are also pollinating and eating insects and doing the whole thing that keep us alive.
But I'm really cheered that you've got that, because sometimes you say it can feel quite polluted where you are. And so, I mean, bats are such a sign of a healthy biodiversity. So that, I think, I mean, I'm quite ignorant.
Yeah, I don't know where they're living, whether they're living in the old roofs of the almshouses, but the lawn is surrounded by lime trees that are very tall. So whether they're living in them. But no, my mum loves it because she's always loved watching bats when she's got a fag on.
You can get these little bat sensors that will tell you which species. You can probably get it online on your phone.
Oh, I'll look tell you that which then. That'd be lovely to know.
Which species they are, I think. Yeah, brilliant, because they have a different tone, apparently, the different species. So the last thing I wanted to say, I mean, you may well, but that's a lovely story, is there is no doubt, as we shut the garden again this year until next spring, the most common question that we've all been asked, you included, Arthur, me and Josie here and the other gardeners, is how on earth have we coped with the slugs with growing so many dahlias? And so I just thought I'd finish with that, because I know it can be so disheartening for people. And I just feel that we do research here quite a lot, and there is no doubt that garden birds really help. But they only eat the bigger slugs. Blackbirds, thrushes, starlings, and robins will eat the big slugs. But birds are really great for eating slug and snail eggs. And that's a key way that feeding them to their fledglings in April and May, as the birds are sort of ripening and coming out of the nest, so are the slugs and snail eggs ripening and coming out of the soil. And so actually getting them eaten is a very good thing, rather than them eating your plants. But also, the more I find out about this and the more we research this here, ground beetles, frogs, toads, slow worms, which I know some people are scared of because they look so like snakes, hedgehogs, shrews, all these things eat slugs. So it's just really important to think of the whole garden ecosystem as kind of a whole. And actually, the more you can encourage a wide range of different little beasties into your garden, the better, really. But if it's still completely oppressive and your plants are still being absolutely massacred by slugs, I do really recommend Nemaslug, particularly in a wet spring and summer like we've had, and doing a spring treatment and an early autumn treatment if numbers are just really out of control. We have found in our areas that really persist with a high slug and snail population, that really, really helps. So I just wanted to finish my sort of side of it with a little bit of optimism, because I promise you it's not a lost case.
No, quite right. And I mean, I've been troubled with slugs a little bit in the greenhouse I use, which is in my neighbour's garden. Mainly because it's my fault, really. Underneath the growing bench is just that typical gubbins, pots en masse that slugs just love to live in. So when it's dark, they'll come out and eat your seedlings. So what I'm doing is, on my capillary matting that all my seed trays are on, there's a moat now of just kitchen cinnamon. A good 2 inches worth. So you will have to, go to Sainsbury's or wherever and buy at least 2 jars of cinnamon, but it's not too expensive. And you can YouTube this if you want to look at it. It's the only thing that I've found that slugs and snails, they touch the cinnamon and they literally repel. There's something in cinnamon they do not like. So that's what I'm using. And so, touch wood, everything seems to be being left alone. Whereas before, I'd walk into this greenhouse in the morning and everything would just be those little dead little stumps. So cinnamon, it is about being organic. And I think that's the other thing that people are noticing. People are getting upset because I think we're finally realizing all the chemicals that we've used in the gardens and our farms, it is starting to come home to roost. So I think, again, it's about getting the message out that we we can't keep using all this cocktail of pesticide and herbicide. It is the thing that's often forgotten about. So, champion all your local councils if they're choosing to use different things. And just try and be, I think it's about giving hope, isn't it? As well as being aware that the numbers are plummeting, but there is hope. And I think that's the thing to keep clinging on to as gardeners. You don't have to be a gardener either. Just try and do things that keep things alive.
And I do think that rewilding from large to little, whether it be at NEP or in individual gardens, has proven that actually things bounce back incredibly well if they have the right habitat and we stop doing the wrong things. And so there really definitely is room for optimism. It's not just pure kind of, rosy tinted spectacles. There is absolute science behind that the more of us that do the right thing, the more things will pin back and populations will recover. And all the lists and descriptions of the top plants, whatever, will be in the show notes. So just go on the website and you'll find all of those. So you don't have to scribble notes endlessly. Thank you, Arthur. A really good one to do at the roundup of the year.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thanks so much for listening to Grow, Cook, Eat, Arrange. I hope it was interesting. There was enough new stuff talking about biodiversity in the garden, which is our pet subject, or one of our pet subjects anyway. So next week, I'm back with Josie Lewis, our head gardener at Perch Hill. And we thought, as it's sort of coming to the end of the year and the start of a new one, we would examine each other about what were our desert island tools. So what are the sort of 5 things that Josie just couldn't live without in the garden? And what are the 5 things that I just couldn't live without bringing the outside in? So whether it's harvesting veg and stuff or flowers and flower arranging. So it's our desert island horti and floristry tools next week. See you then. You can find more information, photos and advice sheets on all the plants and recipes we talk about on this podcast by heading to the show notes or at sarahraven.com/podcast.